And now, the survival show that once survived being interrupted 45 times while trying to record an intro. In this episode, author and prepper consultant Jonathan Hollerman stops back by. He's going to tell us all about how he crafts his prepper fiction just for you. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 242. I'm your host Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. Jonathan, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole, dude.
Hey, Aaron, how's it been?
Man, I've been doing all right. It's a new year. It's, going all right so far, although everybody's freezing their butts off.
Yep.
So, hey, last time we had you on, we mentioned you were the author of a nonfiction book titled Survival Theory, and that you also had a fiction series. And of course, this is a book club episode. So let's focus on the first in the series, Equipping Modern Patriots, a survival story. It includes a very clever acronym, EMP, for those that missed it. Nicely done, Jonathan. Very clever. But hey, man, before we dive into the books, let's get to know you a little bit better. We got to know you a little bit last time. Let's get into it a little bit deeper. How did you come to preparedness? Is this something that was a lifelong pursuit, or is it something you came to after your service as an Air-force SERE instructor? How did that develop?
I would say it's kind of a mixture of both. As a former United States Air Force SERE instructor, that stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, preparedness has always been on kind of the forefront of who I am as a person. It was instilled in me back then. And so, but never in kind of the prepper sense, right? So it was more in the mindset of mental preparedness and being able to handle any situation that's thrown at you. And then probably, 8 or 9 years after I left service, I just started seeing the signs in society, and I started looking at the pandemic threat, and I read the book 1 second after, and that introduced me to the EMP threat. Mel Tappan was also a big, kind of a forefront. I don't know if you know who Mel Tappan is.
Oh, yeah.
He's amazing. I was reading him probably before 1 second after. The book Patriots by James Wesley Rawls, I read that. So, and I'm kind of like a research guy. So like when I read something, I always take it at face value. I want to dig into it myself and learn about it myself. And the more I dug into not even just the EMP threat, but just the vulnerability of our electric grid and how every aspect of human life in America revolves around electricity and how vulnerable our electric grid is from multiple different areas. The more I dug into that, I started realizing that we could have some serious hard times in our future. So this was probably about 15 years ago, I would guess, maybe 12 years ago. And so I just started digging deeper and deeper and deeper. I started reading a lot of different prepper fiction. And I would say that's kind of what got me interested.
Okay. How did writing come up? I mean, as far as like the fiction part of it, is that something, did you write as a kid and then it just came back out again? Or is it something you said, I got a story in me? How did this work?
So that's a big secret. I actually started writing a science fiction fantasy book when I was in high school, and I got about 10 chapters in, and I set that down, and I never touched it for about a dozen years, and I kind of forgot about it. It's just funny you brought that up because I just remembered it. I'll have to dig that out at some point, but I don't think it's going to be worth publishing. But
that's too funny. Did you have a title for it?
Yes, actually, but I'm not going to share it on here.
All right.
I grew up reading a lot of science fiction, Lord of the Rings type genre, Terry Brooks. Probably my favorite author of all time is a woman named Robin Hobbs. She wrote a series that I think the first one was called Assassin's Apprentice. And so I grew up reading a lot of science fiction. So my book was geared towards science fiction, elves, so on and so forth. But as far as my writing career, so I was reading a lot of different prepper fiction, and I was really frustrated with a lot of the kind of the points that the authors were making and their take on what society looked like after an EMP or after a pandemic or after collapse scenario, and how they didn't have any understanding on human desperation and starvation and what that will do to the American people and how they will act. A lot of people think that, well, this is America. We're different here. We'll sing Kumbaya and everybody will work together. And that's all good and fine. We did that after 9/11. We did that after Hurricane Katrina. But if you take food out of the mix and people start to starve, you lose our central infrastructure in this country. Desperate people don't work together. And that's just a fact of life. The idea that there's not going to be massive atrocities in this country if society falls apart and food infrastructure shuts down and the electric grid goes down I think that was probably one of my biggest issues. Is I was reading a lot of fiction and popular book, and I'm not going to name any books, but like 2 weeks after the EMP, the manager at a grocery store was still sitting there, and police officers were sitting outside, and they were allowing people to buy $50 a day in groceries. I'm just sitting there thinking, that's ridiculous. A manager for a big box store isn't going to show up for work after day 2 or 3. The cops are going to go home to be with their families and protect them from the looting and the rioting. The idea that everybody's going to be calm and trying to work this thing out is just it's not real life. And a lot of that comes from my experience in SERE. And one of our things that we did was we took their food away, we took their sleep away. We put them in highly stressful situations up in the mountains, and just to see full-grown men literally fall apart under those situations. And then these are pilots, navigators, some special operations guys, and to see how they would mentally fall apart after 6 days with minimal food, minimal sleep, and then to think the average society as a whole and we're all going to just kind of work together. I didn't buy it. So that's what prompted me to write the first book. To be, upfront, I kind of framed it similar to James Wesley Rawls' the first Patriot book. So I kind of refer to it as information fiction. So it's a fictional story, but I put a lot of information in there. I discuss why the character chose this particular pack or knife, so on and so forth. And I wanted to kind of put my ideas out there and how I would envision handling different situations and how I would envision society as a whole. I went to college for construction and for carpentry, and I never took a lot of English classes. So it was one of those things where I wrote the book thinking, yeah, I'll sell a dozen copies to my ex-military buddies, call it a day type situation. So I published the book. And 3 weeks later, I was at hunting camp, and I pulled up my sales stats, and I've been selling like 20 books a day, and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then it jumped up to like 100 books a day, then 150, then 200 books a day, and I was just like, holy cow! And ended up going up to the top 10 bestsellers list in my genre for about 4 months.
Oh, nice.
Then I had to scramble because I had to find a professional editor to edit it real quick. So because I was starting to get some reviews on the grammar. And justifiably so. Just so you know, if you see those reviews on Amazon, they probably had first edition. So it took me like a month or two. I got a good edited version out there, and it just kind of took a life of its own. From there, that was a pretty big success. I think I've sold a little over 100,000 copies of that first book to date.
Oh, very cool.
And I wrote the second follow-up book, and that was received really well. And then I wrote a full-length preparedness guide. 2 months ago, I released the third book in the EMP series, the Equipping Modern Patriots series.
Very cool. So were you trying to tell a story that had lessons in it, or were you trying to convey lessons and morals and everything else? And the best way to do that was through a story. Which way was that working out for you?
Ooh. All right, Dr. Phil. I've never sat down and analyzed that. Basically, I wanted to get my ideas out there, right? And I don't think my first book's success was on its literary merits. I think mostly I think people resonated with my philosophy and how I saw things falling apart very quickly, and my main characters and how they handled those situations. So the book was actually written from my perspective. So I wrote the book because me and my wife, we owned a coffee shop at the time in Pittsburgh, and I basically wrote it from the perspective of what would be my plan of action. So I developed a plan of action. I had friends that were into preparedness. We had a kind of survival retreat planned. And I said, okay, so how would this play out? So I just wrote it from beginning to end. I didn't even write an outline. I just wrote it from beginning to end. And then I would go here and then I would do this. So I wrote a fictional story, kind of explaining what I would do in that situation.
I gotcha.
So
Okay.
a lot of people actually don't know that. The first couple chapters, the intro to the characters and the character building, a lot of that information, while the names of places are changed a little bit here and there, it's pretty close to what I was going through at the time in my real life. So
okay. You mentioned, to back up for a second, you mentioned Rawls. Is that where you take your writer's tone and voice and everything else from? Do you look for that stylistically? Or, I mean, you also mentioned some, Tolkien and some other things. Where do you get your writer's voice and style from?
I would just say it's life experience. I've read a lot of books in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy reading. It's downtime for me.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy a paperback book. I want to touch it and smell it and feel it. I don't do any ebooks, and only recently have I got interested and started doing more audiobooks because I drive a lot. With my consulting business, I do a lot of traveling, so that's worked out better.
Mm-hmm.
But I would just say I wouldn't pick a specific style. Rawls' first book, Patriots, I really enjoyed it for a lot of different merits. I don't think Rawls is, a world-renowned writer. So, and neither am I. I'm not claiming to be. So
right,
Rawls
but he
is definitely a better
yeah.
writer than I am. But I mean, so for instance, I really like Rawls' writing, or his first book, Patriots, especially. His later books, he seemed to be struggling for direction, in my opinion. That's not to bemoan Rawls at all, because I struggle with that myself. But his first book, I really enjoyed. The one thing I kind of strongly disliked in a lot of prepper fiction is this idea that the United States military is going to come to take all your guns and prepper groups need to fight the military. I don't see that happening. First off, DOD states in the case of a long-term loss of electric grid, most Americans don't realize that 99% of our military is reliant on our civilian electric grid.
Mm-hmm.
There's a DOD report that I have on my website that is telling Congress that if we lose the civilian electric grid for more than a couple days, the United States military will not be able to respond to societal collapse. So all the movies, all the books where, you've got troop carriers and MRAPs rolling down the road and passing out MREs, it's not going to happen. They're in the same boat as everybody else. They're not going to have any power to run their equipment. Now, obviously, Missile Command and Central Command, that's all going to be functional, and Cheyenne Mountain, things of that nature. But the majority of the basic troops on the ground, the bases around the country, they're not going to be functioning. So, but it was more so the military was always the bad guy, right? They're always coming in there, and you've got, John Rambo Prepper and his little band of merry men going toe to toe with the United States military. And it drives me bonkers. Because I mean, if you, and I don't care if your entire family is SEAL Team 6, you can't go toe to toe with today's United States military. Back in 1970, 80s, yes. But with forward-looking infrared drones, the technology, the NSA, it's not like the movie The Patriots where you can just go out in some, swamp somewhere and hide out. They're going to find you, and they're going to send a drone through your front door. That really bugged me. So in my books, I took a different tone. I mean, obviously, you're going to have some elements of, government. Let's not even get into that, how dysfunctional they are. How they're going to react is unknown, but the average troop on the ground, they're not going to turn into this force. Most military guys, serving the military myself, are patriots. We believe in the Constitution. We believe in, the rule of law, and the idea that the government's going to send the military to go take over some town is just, the colonel on the ground. He'd be like, okay. And then he'd get a couple miles outside of the base and be like, yeah, we're not doing this, right? So this ain't gonna happen. So anyways, same thing with police force. I mean, the police has got such a bad name lately, and they're always bad apples in any group. But I mean, as a whole, the idea that the police are going to come kicking down your door and confiscating your guns, even in California and Maryland, I mean, you'd have more of a situation where you get a chance of something like that happening. But there's going to be enough good sheriffs around that are going to just be like, no, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting perspective on the military, as far as, that they would be in a world of hurt along with everybody else. That's actually really quite interesting.
Well, Aaron, they're just people. Right, a lot of people forget. Of course. They're still men and women. Mm-hmm. And they're going to see the news reports, or they're going to hear reports of society falling apart, cities burning down, and they've got family. Mm-hmm. I would expect, and I'm a patriot, man. I'm a veteran, and I believe in the military. I served with honor. I love the military. That was some of the best times of my life. I can tell you right now, you're going to have, 50, 60% go AWOL when this happens. They're going to go home to protect their loved ones. So the idea that they're going to stay on a base somewhere when their wife and kids are in town that's literally falling apart around, there's going to be big holes in the gates on the military bases.
Yeah, there's a similar thing came out about it was police and emergency medical responders. It was a survey a couple of years ago, and I'm sure I'm going to misquote the number, but it was somewhere in the range of 80% surveyed said, pandemic happens, anything else? Yeah, I'm not showing up for work. You can kiss my butt.
Yeah, why would they? You can't fault them.
Yeah.
They put their lives on the line every single day. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody can deny the fact that your immediate family comes first. You have a responsibility to your wife and your kids, or your husband and kids. And the idea that, in the case of a pandemic, that you're going to go to work and drive around in a squad car and deal with coughing, diseased people every day and take that home to your wife and kids. No, they're just not going to show up, and that goes for people that take care of the electric lines. That goes for people that, take care of the nuclear power plants. That takes care, that's all over society. It has nothing to do with first responders. People, if it gets really bad like that, people are going to stop showing up for work, and that's going to have a snowball effect. It's going to get worse and worse. More infrastructure will shut down. And, the government only has so much power to force people to work. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even my wife, who's a healthcare professional, and I've talked about that and tried to figure that, like, in the event of a pandemic, because she's got her hands in people's mouths all day, every day. And I'm just like, gosh, it's difficult to figure out. But it was, the agreement was very quickly like, hey, if it starts getting hinky, you call in sick to work.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And again, you can't fault the doctors and the nurses because they're people and they don't want to go to work and catch that. You're exactly right. In a healthcare situation, well, first of all, most hospitals only have 24 to 48 hours of backup generation in the hospital. Once, if there's no infrastructure and interstate trucking shuts down, there's no bandages and amoxicillin showing up to the hospital, at some point, they're just going to throw up their hands and be like, there's nothing more we can do. I got to go home and be with my family at this point.
Right.
And so, I mean, you're going to have, some of the single men and women maybe stick around a little bit longer. They got into it to help people, and they have a strong innate desire to help society and help people. And that's why they're in that industry. They may stick around for a couple of days, but to think that 72 hours, 4 days in, they're going to still be at that hospital, it's not happening.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be back after this quick break. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? You should see what we do for the Roving Horde Armada members. Check it out today by visiting itrh.net. Members get access to episodes a day early, access to monthly virtual and in-person meetups in some areas, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival all day long with like-minded people. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH. That's right, all the way back to the beginning, including one that was never aired. And those are just a few things you get with your membership when you sign up and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde by going to itrh.net. Again, that's itrh.net. So, I think we've done a pretty good job of setting up here and winding people up.
Sure.
Walk us into your books. How does the series start?
Sure. So the first book is EMP, Equipping Modern Patriots, A Story of Survival. It essentially follows the two main characters, a husband and wife, and an EMP happens, and he understands exactly what's going on. Most of society, if we were hit tomorrow by an EMP, most of the people don't even know what electromagnetic pulse is, and they wouldn't understand what's going on. They wouldn't understand why the power's not coming on. So one of the first things was, I wanted to put forth, hey, you need to, at that time, the main characters lived in the city of Pittsburgh, which is a pretty good sized city.
Yeah.
And they realized that it's going to get really bad really quick with millions of people, starving, desperate people around you. So their plan was to leave there, go up to the family farm, which is about an hour north of the city of Pittsburgh, and kind of work with their relatives and get things set up and squared away. So I could have left it there, but I also wanted to put some of my ideas out as far as what an effective survival retreat looks like. So the main characters go up there and they help their family kind of get the farm ready to go. But the Maria, who's the wife in the story, she's pregnant, and they make a decision that the family farm is still only a couple miles outside of a medium-sized city, which is just down the road. And it's just not a safe location long-term, and they know that. So they make a decision to go up to their survival retreat with their group that they had planned. And it's funny because I took a lot of grief for that. In some of the reviews, people were like, I would never leave my family behind, my relatives, my cousins and my grandparents. I would never leave them behind. But I'm sitting there thinking, you have a duty to your immediate family first, right?
Exactly.
In my opinion, my wife and kids, I love my parents. I have a great relationship with my parents, my grandparents, my cousins. But at the end of the day, my wife and kids come first. And if I know that this is a very bad location and there's no way to take 30 members of my extended family up to a survival retreat, which only has food for 10 or 15 people. So anyways, so then they move on to the survival retreat. So the first book is really about just the world around these main characters and what they experienced leaving the city of Pittsburgh, getting their family set up, getting to the survival retreat. And then I wanted to paint a picture of what the rest of society would look like, what's happening in the rest of the country during that time. So I introduced a character named Bruce Harris, and it basically painted a story from the military's point of view. So the second book is kind of 60% the main characters from the first book and 40% this Bruce Harris character. And then the latest book just continued both those storylines and some of the intrigue and how the government went about trying to feed the American people.
That's really cool. And I think that's interesting that you took that direction with the family, because that's and the choice to have to leave loved ones behind. Because I mean, that's something that I think I know I've had this conversation with a lot of people about making those tough choices. And there does come a point where you have to decide, where, what your priority is, because you can't have a priority to everyone and everything. In those situations, you have to make incredibly tough choices.
Yeah, I talk about this in Survival Theory. I've got, I think, two chapters kind of dealing with this. I fly all over the country and do retreat analysis and perform OPSEC analysis. So, in those travels, one of the big things I experienced was most preppers have never had that conversation with their immediate family. Where do you draw the line?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the biggest problem is lack of food. So if you don't have enough food to feed person X, Y, or Z, they can't come, right?
Mm.
And so you have to have a realistic plan of action for the amount of food that you have or the amount of food that you can acquire, okay? So let's say you have a year's worth of food for you and your wife and your kids, but nobody else in your immediate family has taken the steps to prepare beforehand. and let's say you have a cabin to go to, or Uncle Charlie's farm out in rural wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go out there and you've got your year's worth of food. Now, if you take your brother and his wife and his couple of kids, and your sister and her husband and their couple of kids, and your mom and dad, and then do you take grandma and grandpa? Do you take your first cousin that lives down the street from you? You start figuring all these mouths to feed, and you got a year's worth of food for 4 people. Now all of a sudden you got 20 people show up. You run out of food in 2 months,
Mm-hmm.
maybe less. And you never make it through the first winter. You never make it through till harvest time, till you're able to grow your own food, produce for yourself. And that's a very big problem. And a lot of people ignore that. They like, well, me and my family's got a year's worth of food. It's like, great, but who's going to be eating that food, right?
Yeah.
Is it just you guys? If it's just you guys, great. But if you're bringing a lot of people, and the second side of that is how much are you talking about your plan of action? Because the first rule of prepping is kind of like Fight Club. You don't talk about it. If you're talking about it constantly, even with family members that you love, coworkers that you trust beforehand, and then you go up to Uncle Charlie's farm, and then all of a sudden, in a lot of the prepper fiction, they're always fighting off neighbors or some rednecks that live down the road in a pickup truck that are coming down there to just, steal your retreat's food. My perception of that is it's not going to be some nameless, faceless zombie that you're shooting. It's probably going to be some coworker that remembered about your Uncle Charlie's farm. It's going to be your second cousin. It's going to be people that that are coming for your food,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then the next question is, do you give them some food? Hey, you can't move in here with us. Here's a couple MREs. Well, as soon as they eat those MREs, they're going to be in the same boat tomorrow that they are today. You're not essentially helping them in any meaningful way. You're just delaying by a day their starvation, and they're going to come back because they don't have any other choices.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole point of preparedness is to kind of rebuild when things fall apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And have an infrastructure in place where you can help people and take people in. But it's very important not to do that until you're able to feed them and house them. Okay. So if you're helping people too early in the situation, they're going to continue coming back, and they're essentially a part of your group, even if they're not living there. If you're feeding them at your front gate, it's just a matter of time. At some point, you're going to have to draw a line and be like, I can't keep feeding you. And that's going to be a worse situation because they're going to be really ticked off because now they know you have food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of thought process behind this. And that's what I really tried to put down on paper in my books, was the theology, let's call it, behind survival and the thought process behind it. Because a lot of times I think a lot of people write scenarios that just aren't very realistic,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of prepper fiction. There's one, the guy, it's typical EMP mantra. The guy's traveling for business. He has to travel home. He's got a bug out bag and he starts hiking home, and the story takes place over, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks, maybe more. And the guy's eating MREs like 3 times a day. I'm like, what the heck? Like, how many MREs does this guy have in his pack? Like he's like a Sherpa with like 10 boxes stacked on top of his head, hiking home. I'm like, is nobody else realizing that, this guy would have ran out of MREs a long time ago? Anyways.
Did writing this series change your preparedness or your outlook in any way? I mean, we've gotten into some pretty heavy stuff here, and I think you could have easily called your series of books about hard choices.
Right.
So you spent all this headspace and all this time thinking through these things. Did you end up changing your perspective, or did it harden your decisions about things? How did that work out for you?
Yes and no. I mean, if you were to classify my type of prepper fiction, and my philosophy on preparedness is prepare for the worst, hope for the best.
Mm-hmm.
I really think things are going to be a lot worse than a lot of the prepper experts out there think it is. They have this inflated view of America and Americans and how people are going to react. One of the biggest books that changed my thought process about 10 years ago was a book by Philip Zimbardo. He's a world-renowned psychologist. His life's work is around how good people can commit atrocities. And that really reinforced my experience in dealing with people with starvation and hunger and stress. That's kind of been the defining aspect of my books, is that, hey, you need to prepare for a lot harder scenarios. And if it's less than that, if it doesn't get that bad, then great, you were prepared.
I gotcha. All right. So, hey, let's move on to the lightning round. What is your long gun of choice? Are you an AK, an AR, or a shotgun, or something more exotic, kind of ammo-sexual?
Ammo-sexual. I like it. I lean towards the AR-15 platform. It's the most popular battle rifle in this country. It is extremely reliable, unlike what a lot of the internet myths would have you believe. As long as you keep that gun highly lubricated, that gun will function flawlessly, especially if you have I always recommend my clients get a mil-spec quality AR. It's built to military specifications. Companies like LaRue, Daniel Defense, Bravo Company, or the Colt LE 6920, Law Enforcement 6920. You get a mil-spec AR, it'll last you a lifetime. There's a lot of new AR manufacturers that are out there making $500, $600 guns. And those aren't bad if that's all you can afford, but don't expect it to last you, long term. So I am an AR guy. I am not anti any other gun platform. AK-47 is a fantastic gun. The AR, in my opinion, if you had to scavenge for gun parts in a collapse, a year into a collapse situation, if you had to scavenge for more ammunition, you're going to find 5.56, 223 ammunition. You're going to probably be able to find a part for that AR. If you have something a lot more exotic, like a STIG MCX or, FNFAL, so, one of these other more exotic guns, you might be hamstringing yourself if a part breaks, or if it goes down, or if you lose a spring. As far as gun recommendations, I really recommend picking something that's readily available, right? And sticking in common platforms. Like the 300 Blackout. I have an 300 Blackout upper for my AR, but it is not my primary. It's my secondary, right? It's a great round, suppressed, especially running it suppressed. It's a fantastic hard-hitting round. There's a lot of benefits to it, but I wouldn't make that my primary, right? Because the chances of finding 300 Blackout post-collapse is slim to none.
So what would you consider to be your most important piece of gear? One thing.
You have to be able to protect yourself, and you have to have good quality guns and ammunition to protect yourself and your family and your supplies. So I would say having personal protection, and whatever that looks like for your specific area.
I gotcha. Someone goes out, buys your book, Equipping Modern Patriots, decides Jonathan is my brand of wacky. How do they connect with you? How can they keep up with new books, projects, and find out more about your consulting services? Where do they go?
My website is griddownconsulting.com. And on my website, I have all my books linked where you can go purchase my book. All my books are available on paperback, ebook, whether that be iBook, all the different formats. They're also available on audiobook. And I have a biography, and the front page of my website is my consulting business and how that works and how I work with other people. So that would be the best way to connect to me. There's a contact me page if you want to reach out directly. You can send me an email. So griddownconsulting.com. You can also follow me, Grid Down Prepper, on Instagram, Twitter, or Jonathan Hollerman on Facebook. I don't want to throw out too many things here, Aaron, but
say the website one more time.
griddownconsulting.com.
Awesome. Jonathan, dude, as always, thank you so much for coming back on. And it was really great to hear more about your book, Equipping Modern Patriots.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me. And I'm happy to come on anytime.
Show notes.